know what we can talk about in this nation without talking about white superiority, honestly.
Who defines the meaning of God also defines the relationship between economy and God.
African Americans spent $1.3 trillion last year, making us the 16th wealthiest nation in the world. Why have we not turned those riches into wealth to develop our community?
The Asa Restoration Project is located in South Asasif. We work here in Egypt as the South Asasif Conservation Project. We're located directly across the street from the Ramesseum, right next to the German house in South Asasif, the mountain range, which separates the Valley of the Kings from the Valley of the Queens. We plan to restore the 4 major tombs at this site and open them to the public by 2025, so that when you come to Kemet to visit Karnak Temple, Luxor Temple, the Temple of Hatshepsut, to see the Valley of the Kushite Nobles, where the Asa Restoration Project has funded the restoration of the first Kushite necropolis in Kemet. So if you're interested in supporting our work, because we are funded by the community. If you're interested in funding our work, if you're interested in purchasing any of the books that I've written, my daughter has written, you can go to the website, the IKG's website, which is www.ikg-info.com. That's www.ikg-info.com, and support African people who are working not only for your benefit, but for the benefit of the 7 generations who will come from you. Hi, this is Tony Browder, and I'm happy to be here on this edition of Happy Talks. And the question that comes up quite often is, why did I write Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization? Well, I began writing that book 30 years ago, and the purpose behind writing the book was to compile a comprehensive overview of Kemet, Kush, and the entire Nile Valley, and present the information that I have been privileged to acquire based on my travels to Kemet with Dr. Yosbin Yelkanen, A.C. Hilliard, and actually the study tours that I started doing to Egypt in 1987. So I had all of this information. I read multiple sources about ancient Egyptian history and culture. Some of the information was wrong. Actually, most of the information that I was reading about ancient Egypt was wrong, based on what I was learning from Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Dr. Hilliard, Van Sertima, and so many other scholars who were giving me a broader and deeper understanding of Nile Valley history and culture. So Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization was my way of honoring the men and women who were responsible for shaping my understanding of who I was as a person of African ancestry, and to clarify some concepts and ideas and present this information in a simplified form so that the average person would be able to understand the value and the power of ancient Kemet and Nile Valley culture and civilization. So like my first book from the Browder file, it was written for laymen, and it was also written in such a way that it was 3 books in one. One book is the text that dealt with Nile Valley history and culture. And then I also have in the book a sidebar, short pieces of information, bite-sized pieces of information, which someone could read in 2 minutes or 3 minutes and give them an opportunity to have a conversation starter with someone else. And the third component of the book was the pictures and the illustrations. So I was able by using my graphic design skills to craft a narrative that would make the oldest story ever known more accessible to people so that they can begin to cultivate a greater appreciation for the Nile Valley, which I was beginning to cultivate an appreciation for at that time. The study of ancient Kemet is important because it's the greatest story never told correctly. Everyone has been talking about the Nile Valley. Everyone has written about ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. And what I found when I began my investigation into this history and culture is that most of what we've been taught in school is wrong. Most of what is in the history books is wrong. Most of what's on television, documentaries, and specials and films is wrong. It's all wrong. And as a result of my seeing these distortions in African history and culture, I felt compelled to begin to teach myself this information. And as I began to learn more about this history and culture, I felt an obligation and a responsibility to share this knowledge with every Black life that mattered to me. I made my first trip to Egypt with Dr. Ben 40 years ago. And that trip changed my life because it proved to me that I had been lied to all of my life. And so the work that I've done since 1981 is work that has been done on my part to write a new historical and cultural narrative about the oldest documented civilization known to mankind, an African civilization, and to be able to inspire young students, to be able to inspire elders, and particularly to be able to inspire our folk who are churchgoers, who have a distorted and perverted perception of what Egypt is. Egypt in the Bible, Egypt in many films such as the Ten Commandments and other movie adaptations. Egypt is presented as the land of old wicked Pharaoh, and nothing could be further from the truth. We know based on documented evidence, not what someone said, not what someone believes, but what we know, that Hebrews were never enslaved in Egypt. That never happened. I've heard Hebrew scholars even admit to that fact. Moses was never enslaved in Egypt. The Moses in the Bible is not a true story. That story is a metaphor. Again, I've heard Hebrew scholars acknowledge that fact. There was no Exodus. So all of these stories are just that, stories. They are, in fact, the greatest story ever told. So there is a need, a dire need, to free the minds of African people who have been conditioned to believe other people's stories and reject their own. So the work that I've done, the writing that I've done, the lectures that I do are all designed to change the narrative and give people of African ancestry a story that places them in the center of their history, in the center of their culture, in the center of their spiritual and religious systems, which I feel is necessary if we're going to free our minds. We've been free for over 100 years, but our minds are still enslaved. And until we create and reinforce in the minds of our people an African-centered concept of the Creator, an African-centered concept of spirituality, we will never know freedom. The winged sun disk that one will find above the entrance to every temple in Kemet, and also above the entrance to many chapels inside many temples, is known as the Heru Bedet. Heru is a name for Asar, the son of Asar and Aset. Heru symbolizes, or more specifically, the right eye of Heru symbolizes the sun. Heru was associated with the falcon, and the falcon is a bird that can stare directly into the sun. The falcon is the national bird of ancient Kemet. And so the Bedet represents, it is a symbolic and metaphorical representation of the son of Asar and Aset, Heru, the son of the sun, the son of God. So one version of the significance of the Heru Bedet, which one will find carved above the entrance to the temple of Edfu, which is the only complete temple that one will find in Egypt today. The temple of Edfu is a temple that is dedicated to Heru, or Horus, as he's known by the Greeks. The story of Osiris, Set, and Heru is the story of the founding parents, the founding family of ancient Kemet. Osiris was said to have united the two lands, introduced writing, medu-neter, agriculture, and spiritual traditions in Kemet, and formed the first nation state. Osiris married Set, and then Osiris decided to travel to other parts of the continent of Africa to share his knowledge, to share his technology with them. And in his absence, he left his wife to run their nation. This act was said to have angered Osiris' brother Set, who plotted to overthrow his brother. And ultimately, according to several versions of the story, Set not only murdered Osiris, but he dismembered his brother's body and scattered them throughout the land. Set went searching for the missing parts of Osiris' body, and as she found each body part, she washed it, and then she literally and anointed the body part with oil, and then she is said to have collected 13 of the 14 parts of Osiris' body and laid them out on a table, and then literally remembered her husband, put his body back together, wrapped his body in bandages. Thus began the first process of mummification known to mankind. It took Set 70 days to find the missing pieces of her husband's body, remember him, and prepare him for burial. So as Set began to bury her husband, she grieved as any widow would grieve. She grieved because she was about to bury the man that she loved. She also grieved because, according to a popular version of the story, Set was still a virgin. She and her husband had never consummated their marriage. And so before Set buried her husband, the spirit of her husband Osiris came and impregnated his virgin wife. And the virgin Set gave birth to their son Heru on the same day that it is said that his father was born. That day is December the 25th. So Heru was born of a virgin on December the 25th, over 6,000 years ago. Now, if that story sounds familiar, it's because everyone has copied and stolen from Kemet without acknowledging the sources of their knowledge. So Heru was born of a virgin. Heru was born to avenge his father's death. And at the temple of Edfu, you see this story writ large in 14 panels on the inner retaining wall of the temple of Edfu. Heru defeated Set, and then upon defeating Set, it is said that he was magically transformed into a falcon and flew into heaven to meet with his father and give his father the good news. Upon giving this news to his father blessed him and sent him back to Kemet to rule in his stead. And so at the moment Heru returned to Kemet as the king of Kemet, his father Osiris was resurrected from the dead and took his place on the throne of judgment. So father and son were co-regents. Heru ruled over the physical world. His father Osiris ruled over the spiritual, metaphysical world. And so the symbol of the Heru Badet represents Heru defeating his uncle Set, setting in motion the process by which he was able to reclaim his father's throne. And so that image of the sun disk with the wings of Heru was carved above the entrance of every temple to remind the people coming into the temple of the journey of Heru. And as I mentioned earlier, Heru is the Kemetic name for this African nature or aspect of the creator. His Greek name is Horus. It is from the word Horus that we have derived the word hero. So a hero is someone like Heru who overcomes seemingly insurmountable odds and does the impossible and serves as a role model for his people. So Heru then, the Heru Badet, then becomes a reminder to every person that within you is your divine calling. Within you is the potential to do what no one else can do. So that to me is the essence of the concept of know yourself. This idea of know thyself or know yourself, which I like to say because the word thy was introduced into the English language by William Shakespeare. So know yourself, know who you are, know your heritage, know your DNA, know your lineage is the obligation of every free person. So George G.M. James in Stolen Legacy talked about the concept of know thyself and said that know thyself, the phrase know thyself, was carved above the entrance of every temple in Kemet. So I've been to Egypt 60 times over the last 40 years, and I've been searching for that inscription. I've asked my colleagues, my Egyptian colleagues, if they've ever seen that inscription, and it is nowhere to be found. And then it hit me one day as I was looking at the entrance to the temple, as I was looking at the bidet carved above the doorway, that it's that symbol that represents the concept of know yourself. That symbol, that concept is a metaphor for the power, for the consciousness that we have within us. So when you know yourself, you then tap into your genetic memory, your ancestral lineage, and that is what empowers you to do the job that you were born on earth to do in this lifetime. So there's another important component to the story of the resurrection of Asar. As I mentioned previously, when Heru defeated Set and reclaimed his father's throne, he was magically transformed into a falcon, flew into heaven, shared the good news, the gospel, if you will, the good news with his father, Asar. His father blessed him, and then Heru returned to Kemet and ascended to the throne of his father. And when Heru reclaimed his father's throne, became the legitimate heir to the throne of Kemet, his father was resurrected from the dead and became the Lord of judgment, so that every person in Kemet who died had to stand before Asar on Judgment Day, right? I know that story sounds familiar, but again, remember, as a cultural place marker, that story precedes the story of Jesus the Christ by at least 4,000 years. And after Asar was resurrected from the dead, Heru created a terrestrial monument to honor the resurrection of his father. That terrestrial monument is known as a tekken. That object, the tekken, is better known by its Greek name today, obelisk. So you will find tekkenu, a pair of tekkenu, in front of every temple in Kemet. You will also find, as is the case in Ipet-Aset or Karnak temple, multiple tekkenu or dozens of tekkenu inside of that temple. So the tekken has multiple meanings depending on the context and the time frame in which it is discussed. One meaning is that it represents the resurrection of Asar. Another meaning is that the tekken is used as a gnomon. That is, the shadow of the tekken is used as a sundial to tell the time. The tekken is also symbolic of a beam of light that is consolidated in stone, a ray of light that emanates from Re, the sun, that is frozen in stone. And the capstone of the tekken, or the pyramidion, which is what it's also called, was typically layered in gold or electrum so that it would illuminate the rays of the sun, and again, reinforce this relationship between the sun, the S-O-N, Heru, and the sun, the S-U-N, and the various manifestations of the sun, Kepre, Re, and Amen-Re. So all of these are ways of acknowledging the source of creation, which is responsible for all life as we know it, the source of creation that is associated with the Creator itself. And this source was so important that within the Christian tradition, the day of their worship is named in honor of the source of creation, Sun Day, in honor of the sun. So all of these concepts and ideas originated in the Nile River Valley. And if you don't know that information, then you need to do some serious reading. You need to do some serious research. The sources are available to any curious mind who is interested in expanding their understanding of themselves, their history, their culture, and their ancestors. Every temple along the Nile River, along the HAPI River, served as a university, served as a repository for the spirit of the Creator, God, if you will. Here in Kemet, there were many manifestations of the Creator, Our ancestors understood that the mind of man and woman is too feeble to totally grasp the concept of God, the concept of the Creator. And so they identified multiple aspects of the Creator. An aspect of the Creator associated with water, HAPI. An aspect of the Creator that is associated with the air, Shu. An aspect of the Creator that is associated with the land, Geb. An aspect of the Creator that is associated with the sky, Nut. So all of these aspects of the Creator were acknowledged within myriad temples that were built along the Nile. These temples were sacred spaces where the priests and priestesses who worked within them would maintain a close relationship with a specific nature or aspect of the Creator. And so there were temples associated with Ptah. There were temples associated with Asar, temples associated with Aset, temples associated with Heru, temples associated with Amen, temples associated with Amen's wife, Mut, temples associated with the son of Amen and Mut, Khonsu. So there were dozens of temples all along the Nile. And these temples were not only places where they honored the Netru, masculine and feminine aspects of the Creator. And that's an important concept because you cannot have a male aspect of God without having its female component. It's not practical. It's not feasible. Our ancestors, thousands of years ago in the Nile Valley, knew that. They understood that very clearly. You can't have a god without a goddess. So all of the Netru were born as pairs, complementary pairs, male and female. So the temples served as repositories where the aspect of that nature resided in the Holy of Holies, the central point of each temple, where certain prayers were made during certain times of the day, the month of the year, in order to honor a specific aspect of that nature during that time frame. We also need to understand that these temples served as universities. They served as observatories. They served as libraries. They served as medical schools. They served as architectural schools and engineering schools. And the priests and priestesses were skilled craft persons who studied everything known to the universe, cataloged that information on papyrus scrolls, collected those papyrus scrolls into books, stored those books into libraries. So every temple had a library, and every library had thousands and thousands of books. So you can just imagine the wealth of knowledge that was present here in the Nile Valley over the course of its 3,000-year-old history. That's why everybody wanted to come to the Nile, to get a piece of that knowledge. That's why everybody is in Egypt today, to get a piece of that knowledge. It's so very important, brothers and sisters, that we understand that Kemet is an extension of the civilization in Kush. Kush is an extension of the civilization that developed in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is an extension of the civilizations that developed in Tanzania, in Uganda, in Kemet, so in Kenya. So the Nile River Valley is 4,200 miles long. It is the longest river in the world. It is the only river in the world which flows from south to north. It is the world's oldest cultural highway, as John Henry Clark often referred to it. So the people in the south migrated northward down the Nile, bringing their cargo of knowledge with them, enhancing each land that they touched. And Kemet is at the end of the Nile River. So Kemet was the beneficiary of all of the cultures, of all of the civilizations that preceded it. That is why Kemet, that is why Egypt is so important to mankind today. That is also the reason why people of African ancestry, wherever we may find ourselves, must reclaim Kemet as our own historical and cultural heritage. The city that I'm in now was known in ancient times, well, relatively recent ancient times, as Luxor and Karnak. Originally, the city was known as Wasset. Wasset means the scepter. Luxor is an Arabic word, as is Karnak. Luxor is the origin of the word luxury, right? And so think about Wasset, the scepter. It is the capital of Kemet. It is the cultural, political, and spiritual capital of Kemet. And during its time frame for 2,000 years, Wasset was the cultural, political, and spiritual capital of the world. Wasset was Wakanda. Wakanda is a figment of someone's imagination, but Wasset is real. And so the temple of Ipet-Isut, the most selected places, now known as Karnak Temple, is still to this day the largest temple complex ever created by human beings on the planet. You can take every church built in London and put them inside of Karnak Temple and still have room for 2 football fields. It's an incredible edifice. And so it's important to understand that when the Greeks came here to study at the feet of African thinkers, theologians, scientists, philosophers, mathematicians, astronomers, they referred to Wasset as the city of 1,000 gates. The city of 1,000 gates. When Arabs came in, the city was in ruins, but yet still in its ruined state. They call it Luxor. They refer to it as a palace of luxury. They can only imagine what this place looked like thousands of years earlier. And so it is still the focal point of modern Egypt. 80% of the monuments, temples in Kemet, 80% of what is to be seen in Egypt is right here on the east and west bank of Luxor. You've got Karnak Temple, you've got Luxor Temple, 2 incredible structures. On the west bank, you have the Theban necropolis, which is right behind me. The largest necropolis in the world, necropolis, city of the dead, the largest city of the dead in the world. You have the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, you have the Valley of the Nobles, you have the Valley of the Kushite nobles, you have the Valley of the Workers. Thousands and thousands of people were buried over the course of thousands of years. And as Zahir Watts has often said, less than 10% of the graves in Egypt on the west bank of Luxor have been found, less than 10%. And people marvel at the treasures that were found in the tomb of Tutankhamun or Tutankhamun in 1922 because it was a relatively intact burial. King Tut was insignificant. In the history of Kemet, King Tut was insignificant. He only ruled for about 9 or 10 years. He was 9 years old when he came to the throne. He was 18 or 19 years old when he died. He didn't do anything of any significance, yet his tomb was filled with treasures beyond belief. Imagine what was found or what could be found in the tomb of Amenhotep III, or Jehudi Mes I, Jehudi Mes II, Jehudi Mes III, or the tomb of Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten, or the tomb of Nefertiti. All of these incredible African builders, leaders, teachers had tombs of unimaginable treasure. And maybe at some point in time, some African archaeologists or Egyptologists might be so moved by the ancestors to find a sacred tomb and not rob it, but to be able to restore that tomb to its former glory, to be able to speak the name of the occupant of that tomb so that that person, the spirit of that person, will live again and inspire those African people who are looking for a way out of no way. It could be what the future holds for one of your children. The word HAPI represents the Nile River when it floods. And I believe that the word HAPI, H-A-P-I, is the source of the word happy, H-A-P-P-Y. When the Nile floods, it brought with it waters that ran from the mountains of the moon, waters that ran from the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, which formed the White Nile, which flowed south. And then when you came into Ethiopia, you had water that joined the White Nile from the river in Ethiopia known as the Blue Nile. And those two rivers merge in Sudan, where the city of Khartoum is now located. And they form the singular Nile River, which continues to flow through Kush, Sudan, Nubia, into and through Kemet, Egypt, and enters into the Mediterranean Sea. So it is the melting of the snow from the caps of the mountains that causes the HAPI to flood every year. And so the ancient Africans knew that by studying the stars, studying the heavens, they could determine when the Nile River was going to flood, when HAPI was going to flow. They noticed that the river flooded when the star Septet, the star that we now refer to as Sirius, rises just before sunrise, the month of late June. That's referred to as the helical rising of the star Septet. They knew that the Nile River was about to flood. And so that meant that for 3 months, the Nile River would overflow its banks. The HAPI River would overflow its banks. And so water would cover the land on the east for a mile, on the west for approximately a mile as well. And then within that water was silt that came from the mountains of Ethiopia. The soil in Ethiopia is the blackest soil I've ever seen in my life. It's very rich, volcanic ash, volcanic enriched soil, which made Kemet the most fertile land on the earth. So for 3 months, the land was covered by water. And it was said that that was the time when the men, the engineers, the architects, the designers would build their vast temples, would build the mirror or pyramids, because they couldn't work in the fields. So these were labors of love. These structures were not built by slaves. They were built by spiritually motivated craftspersons who knew that they were building for eternity, who I think understood that thousands of years after these structures were erected, hundreds of thousands, millions of people would come from all over the world to see what they had created. And so the Nile was, the HAPI River was essential to, was the lifeblood of Kemet. And so HAPI is depicted as an elderly man with long hanging breasts. And that is a symbol that represents the breasts are the breasts of an elderly female, a woman who has fed her children, a woman who has fed her nation for generations. So HAPI was the Nile River, which provided water, the essence of life, which was responsible for growing all of this incredible vegetation that we'll find here in the Nile River. HAPI was the original Old Man River, the source of happiness here in the Nile Valley, the source of happiness throughout the world today. Ipet-Isit is the original name of the temple that we now call Karnak. Ipet-Isit, the most selected places. It's the largest temple complex ever created by human beings on the planet. It consists of multiple chapels and sanctuaries within this huge edifice. What's important to note, what I just learned 4 years ago as a result of a conference that the South Ossetia Conservation Project sponsored in conjunction with the Asa Restoration Project. What I learned is something that very few people know, and that is Shabaka and Taharka were responsible for building more chapels inside of Karnak Temple than any other kings in Kemetic history. Kushite rulers during the 25th dynasty built more chapels inside of the largest religious complex on the planet. Something else I'll share with you, that if you come to Kemet on a study tour, your guide will tell you that the first pylon at Karnak Temple was built by Psamtik I, a king, a usurper of the 26th dynasty. But what I also learned at one of the conferences that we sponsored, based on research that was provided by the French, who have had the concession at Karnak Temple for over 100 years, and the Egyptian director of Karnak Temple, we were informed that that first pylon was built by Taharka, a Kushite king who ruled Kemet. You'll find when you step past the first pylon into the open air sun court, one of 10 columns that were erected by Taharka. And as you move past that, that colonnaded hall of Taharka into the covered portion of the temple itself, you will find 136 columns, papyrus-shaped columns. These 136 columns are arranged in 16 rows on either side of the central axis. And you'll find 12 rows of columns on two sides of the central axis, which are the tallest. They're about 96 feet tall. And the papyrus umbo at the top is large enough to hold 100 people standing at its apex. And so this colonnaded hall is built in such a fashion that it creates a telescopic effect. The floor of Karnak Temple gradually moves upward. The ceiling of Karnak Temple gradually slopes downward, creating a telescopic effect, focusing your attention to the Holy of Holies. And so it is on the winter solstice, sunrise of the winter solstice, that the sunlight shining through the eastern gate sends a beam of light radiating down the central axis of Karnak Temple, illuminating the Holy of Holies, where the shrine of Amen resided. Amen. Amen is an ancient African word that represents the unseen presence of the Creator. So when the sun set in the west, it was known as Amen. The sun is the oldest symbol of the Creator, the oldest symbol of God. And so when the sun set, it was known as Amen. So the Creator, the source of all life, disappeared from view, but they knew it would return in the morning as Khepre, the scarab beetle. Khepre represented rebirth. And then when the sun reached its highest point, it was known as Re. So those three names for the three phases of the sun, Khepre, Re, and Amen, represents not only the journey of the sun through the sky, but also represents as a metaphor for our journey through life. We are born, we reached our highest point as Re, and then we descend and die and become Amen, unseen, but we will be reborn again, and the life cycle begins anew. There is no death, brothers and sisters. There's only life after life after life. Ancient Kemites referred to that as Peridim Heru, or coming forth by day, coming forth into a new life. There is no death. Some often ask, how do we stop the Europeanization of African history and culture? The only way we stop it is by embracing our own culture ourselves, to reclaim it ourselves, to know ourselves and become authentic African people and not dark-skinned reflections of our European oppressors. That's the only way it's going to happen. And so I refer to this process as the Wasset principle. African people must do what Wasset did. We must search for the missing parts of our consciousness, and we must find each part, restore it, cherish it, and then bring all of these parts together and remember. Remember, it's all here. The knowledge of our ancestors still resides in our consciousness, still resides in our DNA. And all we have to do is remember. And when we connect to our ancestral legacy, to our genetic ancestral legacy, we are literally tapping into 10,000 generations. Knowledge, memories that take us back at least 250,000 years. We've got the longest genetic memory of any people on the planet. So all we need to do is be ourselves and everybody else will become inconsequential to us. That's it. That's all we have to do. And believe me when I tell you, it's not as difficult as our oppressor has made us believe it is. It's a very easy thing. I've been working on it. I've been doing it for the last 40 years. Look what I've accomplished. I'm not an Egyptologist, but I know more about Egypt than most Egyptologists. I'm not an archaeologist, but I've been funding in archaeological excavations in Egypt for 12 years. I'm not a trained historian, but I've been writing books about African history for over 30 years. So what I have done, anybody can do. There's nothing special about me. I just decided to take time to read and study and know myself and apply what I had learned in my life. Every single person on this planet has the capacity to do the same thing. You just need the will and the desire.
I don't know what we can talk about in this nation without talking about white superiority. Honestly,
Who defines the meaning of God also defines the relationship between economy and God.
African Americans spent $1.3 trillion last year, making us the 16th wealthiest nation in the world. Why have we not turned those riches into wealth to develop our community?